They always say the worst news hits you when you least expect it. But for me, Eleanor Vance, the shock wasn't the news itself. It was the choreography. I was the Senior Compliance Director at Sterling Global Financial, a role that demands absolute precision and a cool head. It was precisely with that professional detachment that I walked into the executive conference room on the 52nd floor of the Sterling Tower, 32 flights above the chaos of Midtown Manhattan. I knew instantly this wasn't about quarterly compliance reports. The room was Victoria Sterling's private domain, all polished marble, museum-quality art, and a single, immense mahogany table reflecting the ceiling lights like dark water. Victoria, my CEO and mentor, sat at the head, wearing the crimson Chanel suit I'd complimented last month, the suit she called her power armor. But it was who was seated around the table that stopped me dead in the doorway. There was Robert Hawthorne, my father-in-law, his tie perfectly knotted, Harvard class ring catching the late afternoon sun. Next to him, my mother-in-law, Martha, clutching her designer handbag like a life raft, her eyes glued to her phone screen. Beside her, Chloe, Michael's sister, whose usually impeccable makeup looked carefully repaired over fresh tears. And then there was Michael, my husband of 12 years, Michael Hawthorne, perched on a chair next to Victoria, his hand resting casually on her shoulder, his wedding band, the simple platinum band I'd slipped onto his finger, gleaming under the floor-to-ceiling windows. It wasn't a family meeting. It was an ambush, a hostile corporate takeover of my life. Martha, ever the spokesperson, broke the silence, her voice too bright, too rehearsed. Eleanor, darling, we needed to talk to you about some restructuring opportunities. Restructuring. I allowed myself a moment of silence, letting the word hang there, clinical and utterly detached from the human mess they'd created. I felt my position as Senior Compliance Director kicking in, the instinct to observe, document, and remain neutral until all the facts were analyzed. My legs, somehow, held me upright despite the sudden, seismic shift in my personal tectonic plates. Restructuring, I repeated, my voice steady, surprising even myself. Robert cleared his throat, adjusting his tie. Your position at Sterling Global. Victoria has a few ideas about your future here. That's when I saw the documents. Spread across the table, legal documents typed on heavy bond paper, signed and notarized. A separation agreement, asset division worksheets, and a draft resignation letter from Sterling Global Financial. They had already sealed my fate, not just as a wife, but as a professional. Victoria leaned back in her chair, the same chair where she'd praised my integrity and attention to detail just 6 months ago, promising me partnership track. She used the voice she reserved for explaining devastating market losses to a client, detached, sympathetic, and utterly pitiless. Eleanor, you are an intelligent woman, Victoria began. Surely you've noticed the dynamics in your marriage have been evolving. Evolving. What a polished, corporate euphemism for calculated betrayal. I looked at Martha, the woman who had taught me her secret Thanksgiving stuffing recipe, who'd held my hand at my father's funeral. She finally looked up from her phone, guilt briefly clouding her eyes before she recovered. We didn't want to hurt you unnecessarily, Martha whispered, a performance of concern. Some things resolve themselves naturally given time and space. Time and space. I finally moved, taking 2 slow steps toward the table. Is that what you call secret meetings in my boss's office? With legal documents drafted and ready. I pointed to the resignation letter. You've already planned my professional demise? Robert, adopting his best boardroom persona, jumped in. We wanted this transition to be as smooth as possible. Victoria has been very generous with the severance terms. Generous. My mentor, the woman I trusted, was colluding with my husband and his family to orchestrate my professional and personal humiliation. The rage inside me was a cold, hard substance, not a sudden, fiery explosion. It was the calculated fury of an analyst. I pulled out my phone. Slowly, deliberately, I took a photograph of the scene. The four of them, united in their calculated cruelty, sitting around that expensive table with their documents and practiced expressions. They looked like a board of directors conducting a hostile takeover, which in effect they were. "Eleanor, please be reasonable," Michael finally spoke, his voice measured, the voice he used when calculating market risks he didn't want to acknowledge. "This doesn't have to be adversarial." I looked at him, the man whose coffee I'd made that morning. 1 sugar, splash of cream. The silver tie I'd given him for his birthday brought out his eyes, the eyes that now avoided mine. "You're right," I said, a genuine, unsettling calmness in my tone that caused them all to exchange a quick glance. "It doesn't have to be adversarial at all." I turned and walked toward the door, my hand on the cool metal of the handle. "By the way, Victoria," I paused, turning my head just enough to catch the color draining from her face. "You might want to review Section 12 of Sterling Global's corporate ethics policy, the part about supervisor relationships with subordinates, family members, and the required documentation. I wrote that section myself, remember? Very thorough." I opened the door and stepped out. "Oh, and Martha, cancel whatever you're planning for my birthday next month. I'll be making my own arrangements." I left them there, basking in their moment of perceived victory. They thought they had shattered my life beyond repair. But as the elevator dropped those 32 floors, I knew they had just made one fatal mistake. They had cornered the compliance director. And a compliance director, above all else, knows how to document. The facade of our perfect life had fallen, but the foundation for my revenge, systematic and devastating, was already set. The descent in the executive elevator was the fastest, most transformative period of my 39 years. 32 floors to reprocess my entire world. It wasn't just Michael's hands on Victoria's shoulder. It was the entire family structure. Robert's boardroom voice, Martha's performance, Chloe's silent discomfort. All confirming a truth that had been hiding in plain sight. This wasn't mere passion. It was a business transaction masquerading as an affair. Standing in the marble lobby of Sterling Global, the usual rush of Manhattan felt like static. I felt nothing but an icy clarity. They had calculated the cost of the affair to my heart and career, but they hadn't calculated the cost of exposing their corporate crimes. They had underestimated the cold, meticulous mind of the woman they were trying to discard. My phone buzzed. It was Ethan, my assistant, a sharp kid fresh out of NYU who handled my schedule and, more importantly, my documents. 3 texts flashed on the screen. Urgent. Need to speak ASAP. Off the record. Coffee on 47th Street? Ethan never called for off-site meetings. That single fact was the first tangible proof that their conspiracy had a wider ripple effect. I found my SUV in the parking garage and drove through the city, my hand steady on the wheel. The knot in my stomach was tightening, not from heartbreak, but from the professional realization that I had missed something enormous. A senior compliance director should never miss a pattern this large. The shame of that professional failure was almost worse than the personal one. Ethan was already at the coffee shop, tucked away in a corner booth, hunched over his laptop. He looked rumpled. a stark contrast to his usual crisp appearance. "Eleanor," he said, the respect in his voice a small anchor in my storm. "I've been debating whether to show you this for 2 weeks." He slid his laptop towards me. "After seeing you come down from the 50th floor, looking like that, I can't keep quiet." The screen displayed Victoria Sterling's executive calendar, which Ethan had access to for scheduling purposes. Dozens of blocks over the past 3 months were highlighted in green. "Portfolio review private." No client name attached, no dial-in information, no meeting room booked. Ethan explained, his voice low. "And look at the pattern." He scrolled through the weeks. Every single portfolio review private aligned perfectly with times I was traveling: the Boston Regulatory Conference, the Seattle Compliance Training, the emergency audit in Philadelphia. "The first one I noticed was in September," Ethan confessed, his eyes wide with fear and loyalty. "The weekend you went to Boston." He clicked over to a new screen. Corporate credit card records. "Victoria expensed a dinner for 2 at Daniel that Saturday. Listed as client development. No client name recorded." September. The same time Michael had started locking his study door for calls, taking trips labeled unexpected business, and showering before breakfast instead of after. 3 months of calculated deception, disguised in corporate efficiency. "There's more," Ethan continued, taking a breath. Michael's firm, Hawthorne Global Investments, started getting referrals from Sterling Global around the same time. High-value clients that usually go to our preferred institutional partners. I stared at the screen. The evidence of my life's dissolution was laid out in calendar entries and expense reports. "Why, Ethan? You're taking a huge career risk." He closed the laptop, finally meeting my gaze. "Because you're the only executive at Sterling who's ever treated me like a human being, Eleanor, not furniture. And because what they're doing isn't just morally wrong, it's illegal. Steering clients to benefit a personal relationship? That's a violation of about a dozen SEC and corporate regulations. You taught me to watch for that." The phone rang, shattering the tense quiet. Martha's name flashed on my screen. I let it go to voicemail, but she called back immediately. I answered the second time. "Eleanor, darling, your birthday is coming up. Robert and I want to host a party for you at our Long Island estate. A milestone birthday. 39 deserves proper celebration." The artificial brightness in her voice was a jarring contrast to the silence in the coffee shop. I hadn't seen her this enthusiastic about my birthday in 12 years. "Oh, and you aren't traveling this weekend, are you?" Martha asked, the casual question dripping with false concern. "I know you have that Miami conference coming up soon." My blood ran cold. The Miami conference was 2 weeks away, and I had only told my immediate team and Ethan. "How did you know about Miami, Martha?" She laughed nervously. "Oh, I must have heard Michael mention it. He's so proud of your career advancement. Speaking of which, are you working late tomorrow? I thought we could grab lunch." 3 calls in 1 week, all probing my schedule. I looked at Ethan, who was already pulling up the visitor logs for Sterling Tower. His fingers flew across the keyboard. "I can't see meeting details," he murmured, "but check this out." He pointed to a highlighted section. "Michael Hawthorne signed in as Victoria Sterling's guest 4 times in the past month, always during your travel dates." For times, while I was auditing, managing risk, and building the career they were now trying to liquidate. Michael had been using my professional absence as an opportunity for both adultery and corporate collusion, and his entire family had been running interference. using my schedule as their playbook. My victimhood was over. My investigation was just beginning. The full weight of the family's complicity didn't hit me until the following week at Robert's niece's wedding reception at the Rainbow Room in New York City. The air was thick with Manhattan society glamour. Champagne fountains, glittering skyline views, and the suffocating performance of Hawthorne perfection. I was standing on the terrace, feigning interest in the financial district lights, when James found me. Michael's younger brother had always been the black sheep, the sensitive soul crushed by Robert's expectations. He was swaying slightly, his expensive tuxedo rumpled. A champagne flute clutched like a distress beacon. "Eleanor!" James slurred, leaning in, his breath heavy with alcohol, and something heavier, guilt. "You're too good for all this, for what they're doing." My heart hammered. He was the weakest link, and I knew his words, fueled by liquid courage, with a truth trying to break free. "What is it, James? What is everyone doing?" He looked around nervously like a man drowning. "The family. They've been handling things, managing the situation. But you deserve to know. It's been months. The whole family knows, and we're all just pretending." Before he could finish, Chloe materialized beside him, her smile sharp as broken glass. "James is overwhelmed, Eleanor. Wedding emotions and too much champagne. You know how he gets." Her fingers dug into James's arm, a vice-like grip of family control. James resisted momentarily. "She should know, Chloe. It's been 6 months. The business," Dad said. Chloe cut him off instantly, dragging him away. "He's exhausted. We'll talk later, Eleanor." But the damage was done. The whole family knows. It's been 6 months. James's desperate words echoed the timeline Ethan had uncovered. This wasn't a sudden, impulsive affair. This was a sustained, calculated campaign of deceit. They weren't just covering for Michael. They were actively managing my emotional pain to protect their financial interests. That night, I didn't cry. I sat at my kitchen island, staring at my laptop, the image of Michael's hand on Victoria's shoulder competing with James's terrified, guilty eyes. Michael was a pawn, and I was the obstacle. The entire Hawthorne ecosystem was toxic, built on the premise that appearance trumped integrity. I needed more than suspicion or a drunken confession. I needed evidence that would hold up in a court of law or before the SSE. I needed to move beyond the emotion of the betrayed wife and embody the role they had groomed me for, the merciless corporate investigator. I recalled a conversation with my old college roommate who had survived a similar financial betrayal. She had mentioned a forensic accountant who had saved her from ruin. I found the contact information in an archived text. Bethany Shaw, Discreet Financial Investigations. I called Bethany, even though it was past midnight. She answered on the second ring, calm and professional. "Beth told me you might call," she said simply. "Can you meet tomorrow? Bring every financial document you can access. Tax returns, bank statements, corporate filings. Everything." The next morning, I met Bethany in her office in Queens, a nondescript building, a universe away from the gilded cages of Sterling Tower. Bethany was mid-50s, wearing jeans and a simple crewneck, looking more like a friendly aunt than a financial detective. Her office was orderly, the walls covered not with degrees, but with complex flowcharts. I laid out the timeline. Victoria's private calendar blocks, the high-value referrals to Hawthorne Global, Michael's sudden interest in my travel schedule, and James's confession. Bethany took notes on a yellow legal pad, listening with the patience of a seasoned therapist and the sharp focus of a predator. "And you still have full access to Sterling Global's financial systems?" she asked when I finished. I'm Senior Compliance Director, I replied. I have access to everything, except perhaps the compensation details of the board. Bethany smiled for the first time, a thin, precise curve of her lips. That's more than enough. Here's what we look for: unusual flow of funds, contracts that circumvent approval processes, investment opportunities that should have gone through competitive bidding but didn't. Your husband's family didn't just know about the relationship, Eleanor. They were profiting from it. Her words weren't a revelation, but a confirmation. They were profiting. It transformed the betrayal from a tragic love triangle into a federal case. The pain was still there, but it was now weaponized. I was no longer fighting for my marriage. I was fighting for the integrity of the capital markets and for my own professional honor. The stage was set not for a confrontation, but for an audit, and I was the auditor. For the next 3 days, my life became a double existence. By day, I was Eleanor Vance, the diligent, slightly stressed compliance director, managing regulatory risks and assuring the board of Sterling Global's adherence to policy. By night, I was a ghost in my own office, pulling up records that painted a devastating picture of corruption, meticulously documenting the evidence that would demolish the Hawthorne legacy. I worked only after 8 p.m., when the floor was deserted, the silence broken only by the hum of the servers and the distant traffic. My compliance access was a master key, opening every virtual door in Victoria Sterling's house of cards. The key discovery centered on investment opportunities. 6 months ago, exactly when Victoria and Michael's private meeting started, Victoria had begun steering municipal bonds, high-yield private equity allocations, and pre-IPO stock offerings away from Sterling's established, top-tier partners. The primary recipient of these high-margin, guaranteed return opportunities? Hawthorne Global Investments, the failing import-export family business that had mysteriously pivoted into investment management 2 years ago. The numbers were staggering. Bethany confirmed it on a secure video call. $5 million in directed business, Eleanor. In 6 months. That's not a mistake. That's a financial conspiracy. Your in-laws didn't just facilitate an affair. They engineered a corporate kickback scheme. I spent hours mapping the connections. Robert Hawthorne's signature appeared on contracts he had no legitimate reason to access. Martha was listed as a strategic consultant on lucrative deals, despite having no financial credentials whatsoever. And Chloe's struggling design firm had suddenly won Sterling's annual marketing contract at rates 40% above market value. Every member of the family had their hand in the till. My home life became a psychological battlefield. I spent one late night mapping out the timeline of deception on the whiteboard in my spare room, the one I usually used for compliance flowcharts. Red lines connected dates, blue circles marked transactions. Green highlights showed every family dinner where my travel schedule had been discussed. Sunday dinner, September 12th, Martha subtly asks about my Boston trip. Monday, September 13th, Victoria schedules, portfolio review, private during my travel dates. Tuesday, September 14th, a $1.5 million municipal bond allocation is directed to Hawthorne Global. Wednesday, September 15th, Michael comes home with flowers, a guilty gesture I had dismissed as work stress. The guilt offerings, the subtle manipulations. It wasn't just Michael who was lying. It was a coordinated effort that took place over 12 weeks of Sunday dinners, holiday gatherings, and casual morning conversations. The biggest shock came from an accidental discovery during a routine quarterly expense report review, the kind of monotonous work I usually outsourced. Buried within the authorized user list for Victoria's executive account, card ending 4421, was a second name, Michael Hawthorne. My hands shook as I pulled the detailed statements. The St. Regis, multiple charges on dates. I was in Seattle. Intimate dinners at Lou Bernardine and 11 Madison Park during my Philadelphia audit. A weekend rental in the Hamptons, labeled client entertainment, coinciding precisely with my mother's birthday visit to California. The one I couldn't attend because of an urgent work audit Michael encouraged me to take. But the worst charge, the one that broke the last shard of my heart, was a $25,000 charge at Cartier labeled Estate Jewelry Consultation, dated the day after my promotion was announced. Michael had held me close that evening, telling me how proud he was, promising we'd celebrate properly. He had been buying Victoria a token of their successful conspiracy with the company's money, while using my career success as cover. The paper trail wasn't just evidence of an affair. It was evidence of a brazen, arrogant documentation of financial crime. They hadn't just betrayed me. They had signed off on the betrayal in triplicate, assuming the compliance director would never look at her own family's trail. I printed everything, backed it up to 3 different encrypted locations, and sent copies to Bethany. Her text came back immediately, stark and professional. Wire fraud. Securities fraud. Embezzlement. Your boss just handed you a federal case, Eleanor. Stay calm. Focus on the strategy. Calm. I was beyond calm. I was professional. The time for tears was long past. The time for justice, cold and systematic, had arrived. The final piece of the personal confession came through a meticulously planned encounter. I had been keeping a low profile, but the baby shower for Robert's niece Sophia was a mandatory Hawthorne event, held at the exclusive Yale Club, all pastel elegance and champagne brunches. I arrived late, claiming delays from a mock audit, my purse discreetly placed to record audio. Martha, smelling of Chanel No. 5, immediately pulled me aside near the gift table. She launched into a carefully scripted speech about how all this work couldn't be good for me, her eyes gleaming with anticipation. Sometimes, I said, letting an air of manufactured exhaustion creep into my voice, I wonder if I'm missing out on other things, focusing too much on my career. Martha pounced, relief flooding her face. This was the moment she had been coached to deliver. A career is important, dear, but it shouldn't be everything. We need to accept that people grow in different directions. Michael, for instance, has been exploring new horizons lately. It's healthy for a marriage when both partners have room to explore their options. Explore their options. Such a clinical phrase for adultery and theft. You know what I mean, Martha continued, mistaking my neutral expression for acceptance. Professional development, new connections. Victoria has been wonderful for his career growth. You should be proud he's expanding his network. Focus on what you do best, Eleanor, and let Michael do the same. Everyone ends up happier that way. Her words, captured clearly by the recorder in my purse, were the confession I needed. Active family encouragement, strategic planning, and the explicit suggestion that my dignity was acceptable collateral damage for Michael's exploration and their financial gain. That night, Michael was out on another late client meeting. I locked myself in the spare bedroom and spread out the evidence on the bed. Printed emails, photographed receipts, transcribed recordings, Bethany's financial analysis, and Ethan's calendar evidence. It looked like a prosecutor's war room. The financial fraud alone totaled over $500,000 in misappropriated funds. The conflicts of interest violated dozens of SEC regulations. But the most damning document was the timeline of deception. 6 months of lies laid out hour by hour, lie by lie. Every time Michael had kissed me goodbye while planning to meet Victoria, every family gathering where they discussed my schedule to facilitate their encounters, every moment they smiled at me while calculating the money flowing into their accounts. As the sun rose over Brooklyn, I looked at the man sleeping peacefully in our bed. He had no idea that the woman he had married, the one who trusted blindly, was gone. In her place stood a professional who understood that the best revenge wasn't emotional. It was procedural, systematic, and devastatingly documented. The final element of the conspiracy arrived late Thursday afternoon. Chloe, Michael's sister, appeared at my office door. She looked wrecked. Her expensive clothes were wrinkled, her usual composure completely shattered. "We need to talk," she pleaded, collapsing into the guest chair. "Not for forgiveness. I don't deserve that, but you should know the whole truth." She spoke for an hour, detailing exactly how the plot had begun 8 months ago. Robert's desperation as the family business failed, Martha's immediate suggestion to leverage Michael's proximity to Victoria, and how they had coached Michael through the initial approach. "Mom and Dad pushed him toward her," Chloe sobbed. "They said it was for the benefit of the family. They said you were too focused on your career to notice or care. They made it seem like he was doing the right thing for everyone. Too focused on being perfect. That was the fatal misjudgment. They hadn't counted on my professional thoroughness. Her confession was the capstone. Not just financial fraud, but conspiracy, premeditation, and systematic deception involving every member of the Hawthorne family. I allowed her to leave, her confession recorded and secured in 3 separate locations. The evidence was complete. The time for deployment was now. The answer to the question of how to deploy the destruction arrived 3 days later, in the form of Martha's insistent phone call. "Eleanor, darling, your 40th birthday is just weeks away," she chirped, the unusual brightness in her tone immediately putting me on high alert. "Robert and I insist on hosting a grand party for you at the estate. A milestone birthday deserves a proper celebration." Martha had never hosted my birthday in 12 years. The sudden, forced enthusiasm felt orchestrated, calculated. "That's very generous, Martha," I replied, keeping my voice steady. "But I have already made arrangements." "Nonsense," she interrupted, her tone shifting from suggestion to command. "I've started making arrangements already. Saturday the 15th, cocktails at 7, dinner at 8. We'll keep it intimate, family and close friends." Then came the calculated trap. "I thought it would be appropriate to invite Victoria Sterling, given your professional relationship. It would be a nice gesture, wouldn't it? Show that there are no boundaries between work and family life." No boundaries. The phrase hung between us, the silent confession she didn't realize she had made. They wanted to use my 40th birthday, a landmark of my life, to force me to publicly accept the evolution of their new, profitable family dynamic. They would frame it as sophisticated, mature, and evolved, with all their society friends as witnesses to my humiliation. "Of course," I said, a slow, predatory smile forming on my lips. "Victoria should definitely be there." After ending the call, I sat at my desk and mapped out their game plan, a controlled environment where they could manage the narrative. The timing, however, was perfect, but not for the reason they thought. My first preparation step involved the austerely powerful building of the Securities and Exchange Commission in Lower Manhattan. The investigator who took my report, a woman named Janet Chin, reviewed my meticulously documented file with increasing professional interest. "This is extensive," Janet said, flipping through the evidence of financial fraud and systematic kickbacks. "How long have you been compiling this?" 3 weeks of active documentation, I replied. But the crimes spanned 6 months. You understand that filing a formal complaint triggers a federal investigation that cannot be stopped once it starts? She asked, looking up sharply. I understand completely, I confirmed. 2 days before the party, I hand-delivered copies of everything to 3 different destinations, timing their arrival precisely. The SEC received the full financial fraud and securities manipulation documentation. Sterling Global's board of directors received a certified package detailing their CEO's misuse of corporate resources and breach of fiduciary duty. The State Attorney General's office received evidence of the broader conspiracy involving contract manipulation and commercial bribery. Each package was timed to arrive Monday morning, 48 hours after my party. I wanted the Hawthorns and Victoria to enjoy their last weekend of thinking they had won, before their world imploded with the force of a federal investigation. The final piece was the envelope of condensed destruction. Into a single manila envelope, I placed the most damning pieces. Photographs of Michael's signatures on Victoria's personal luxury expenses, screenshots of Chloe's recorded confession, Martha's recorded admission of exploring options, and most crucially, copies of the official SEC and board reports with visible timestamps. This envelope was my birthday gift to myself, the moment I stopped being their victim and became the architect of their downfall. I met my friend Marie, who agreed to attend the party. You want me to record whatever happens? She asked, stirring her latte. I want documentation of their faces, I stated, when they realized that my definition of maturity includes accountability. In the week leading up to the party, my life with Michael was a masterpiece of psychological warfare and emotional containment. I moved through our Brooklyn brownstone as if nothing had changed, while inside, I was already living a separate life, meticulously preparing my exit. First, I visited my divorce lawyer, recommended by Bethany, a specialist in high-asset divorces involving financial crimes. I secured my personal accounts, moved my separate retirement funds, and documented the current value of all marital assets. Michael wanted a divorce? After what was coming, I would be the one ready. That evening, I found Michael in his study, the door unusually open. He looked up, a flicker of guilt, or perhaps anticipation, crossing his face. Your mother called about the party, I said, leaning against the doorframe, my voice casual. It's very thoughtful of her to host. She wants to do something special for you, he replied, his voice carefully neutral. You only turn 40 once. True, and she mentioned Victoria will be there. Michael's fingers stilled on his keyboard. Is that a problem? Why would it be a problem? She's my boss's CEO. We work together every day. He studied my face, searching for suspicion, anger, or knowledge. But I had perfected the mask they had all been wearing for months, the one that said everything was fine while kingdoms burned behind our eyes. You're right, he said finally. It's good to maintain those relationships. Relationships. Everything in the Hawthorne world boiled down to relationships, connections, networks. They had built their entire conspiracy on the assumption that relationships mattered more than truth, and that connections trumped integrity. Saturday, I promised myself, would show them otherwise. The days crawled by. Michael continued his nightly routine of late calls and secretive emails. Martha and Robert called daily with updates on the party logistics, a thinly veiled attempt to ensure I hadn't changed my plans. I listened to their fake enthusiasm, knowing they were organizing the stage for my public execution. My friend Marie, my only true confidant, was my emotional lifeline. We finalized her role, positioned near the bar, phone recording, ready to capture the reactions of the Hawthorne family, not just the words. The internal monologue was the hardest part. I still saw the good Michael, the man who proposed to me on the High Line, the man who held me when my father died. But now, every memory was tainted, viewed through the lens of a forensic accountant. Was that moment genuine, or was he just covering his tracks? The cold, calculated answer was almost always the latter. Love without respect, I realized, was worthless. The day before the party, Martha called one last time, her tone bordering on triumphant. "Eleanor, dear, I'm just confirming the schedule. Robert is going to give a very special, personal toast in the library after dinner. Just family. Then we'll all return to the party. A private confrontation, designed to manage my breakdown out of sight. A private, controlled environment where the four of them could corner me and read their prepared script about emotional evolution and mature acceptance." "It sounds perfect, Martha," I said, my voice sweet and cooperative. "Wonderful. We're so relieved you're handling this with such dignity." Dignity. They equated silence and compliance with dignity. On Saturday, I would redefine the term. I would show them the dignity of a woman who refuses to be compromised, who uses her professional skill to achieve justice. My revenge wasn't about screaming or breaking things. It was about precision. It was about using the rules they thought they could exploit to bring the entire system down on their heads. The long game, the one they never saw coming, was finally about to be played. Saturday arrived with the crisp, cold air of mid-March in Long Island. I stood in front of my bedroom mirror, adjusting the simple, black sheath dress I'd chosen, elegant enough for Martha standards, dark enough for a funeral. Michael emerged from the bathroom, impeccably dressed. "You look beautiful, Eleanor," he said, meeting my eyes in the mirror. I saw not love, but a deep, nervous anticipation, the look of an actor about to step onto a stage where he knows the script, but not the audience's reaction. "Thank you," I replied, slipping the manila envelope into my clutch bag. "Your mother will appreciate the effort." The drive to the Hawthorne estate felt endless. The sprawling colonial mansion was lit up, glowing with soft, expensive lighting. Martha had outdone herself. Fresh flowers, a string quartet, and enough champagne to float a small yacht. Martha swept toward me, a vision in silk and diamonds. "Eleanor, darling, happy birthday. You look absolutely stunning." Near the bar, I saw Victoria Sterling. She was wearing a stunning, blood-red gown, sipping champagne, her expression a careful mixture of pity and triumph. She raised her glass in a mock toast. Red, a perfect visual flag for the impending disaster. The party unfolded like a carefully choreographed dance. Expensive appetizers, polite conversations about real estate and the stock market. But beneath the surface, I could feel the tension. Martha constantly checking her watch, Robert and Chloe exchanging meaningful glances. Marie was perfectly positioned near the fireplace, chatting animatedly with one of Robert's golf buddies about market volatility, her phone discreetly ready. At precisely 8:30 p.m., Martha clinked her glass. "Everyone, please. A toast to our dear Eleanor on her 40th birthday." She delivered a speech that sounded heartfelt to anyone who didn't know the truth, speaking of family, growth, and embracing new chapters. "May this year bring you clarity, acceptance, and the wisdom to recognize happiness in all its forms," Martha concluded, every word a barbed message wrapped in a wish. As the guests applauded, Martha gently touched my elbow. "Eleanor, dear, could you join us in the library for a moment?" Robert has a very special, private gift he'd like to present. I followed her down the grand hallway, hearing Michael's footsteps behind me. The library door closed with a soft, final click, the sound of a trap snapping shut. Robert, Martha, and Chloe arranged themselves in a semicircle. Michael stood awkwardly by the bookshelves, unable to meet my eyes. "Eleanor," Robert began, adopting his most patronizing tone, "we wanted to speak with you privately because we care. We're family, and family looks out for each other." Martha took over, her voice smooth and practiced. "We know this might be difficult to hear, but we believe you're mature enough to handle the truth. Michael and Victoria have developed feelings for each other, real, profound feelings that transcend conventional relationships. Transcend. I wanted to laugh at the sheer audacity of the corporate jargon they use to justify infidelity and grand theft. "They are soulmates," Martha insisted, warming to her theme. "It would be selfish to try and fight that kind of connection." Robert nodded sagely. "Forcing people to deny their true feelings only creates misery for everyone involved. Victoria has already been very generous in the settlement terms. She is prepared to ensure you are financially comfortable." Chloe, struggling with the script, added in a near whisper, "You are strong, Eleanor. You'll handle this with dignity. We all know how capable you are." They finished their rehearsed presentation, their arguments about emotional evolution and mature acceptance, framing Victoria's predation as cosmic inevitability. When they finally fell silent, waiting for my meek response, I smiled. It was a genuine, terrifying smile. "You're absolutely right," I said calmly. "I should handle this with maturity and grace." Relief flooded Martha's face. Robert sighed visibly. They thought they had won. "Shall we return to the party?" Martha suggested, already moving toward the door, eager to finalize the narrative. "No need to rush," I said, my voice carrying a new, unwavering authority that stopped Martha dead in her tracks. "We should finish this private family discussion first." I walked past them, my heels clicking on the Italian marble floor, moving directly toward Michael, who was still avoiding my gaze. I stopped right in front of him and Victoria, whose red dress now seemed to blaze under the library lighting. The conversations near us began to quiet as people sensed a shift in the room's atmosphere. All eyes were on the four Hawthorns and their newly installed CEO. "Michael, Victoria," I announced, loud enough for the surrounding guests to hear every syllable. "Since we're all being mature adults here, I have something for you both." I pulled the manila envelope from my clutch. It felt heavy, loaded with the weight of 6 months of betrayal and my own meticulous professional counterattack. I held it out between them, like a gavel delivering a verdict. Michael's face went instantly pale. He recognized the professional gravity of the heavy envelope before he even touched it. "Eleanor, what is this?" he choked out. "Open it," I said simply. "After all, we're handling this like sophisticated people, aren't we?" Michael's fingers fumbled with the seal, the platinum band on his hand now seeming like a shackle. I watched his eyes scan the first page. The letterhead of the Securities and Exchange Commission, the official case number already assigned, the word fraud visible in bold capital letters. His hands began to shake violently as he reached the second page. The documented financial fraud, his own signatures authorizing Victoria's personal expenses, the evidence of his family's business receiving illegal kickbacks. The sound that escaped him wasn't a scream. It was a primal, gut-wrenching sound of utter loss, the sound of a man watching everything he valued, money, reputation, and freedom, evaporate. The envelope dropped from his grasp, pages scattering across the imported marble floor. Guests nearest us could clearly see the official headers, the detailed financial summaries, and the names of Hawthorne Global and Victoria Sterling listed as co-conspirators in commercial bribery. Eleanor, please, you don't understand. Michael reached for me, his hands the same hands that had signed away our marriage for money he hadn't earned. I understand perfectly, I stated, my voice ringing across the now silent room. My husband's family has known about his affair with my boss for months. They facilitated it because Victoria was steering illegal profits to their struggling business. Every person in that library just tried to convince me to accept this quietly, for the sake of their convenience and their bank accounts. The room remained frozen. Guests stood like statues, champagne flutes suspended midway to lips. Marie, from her position by the bar, had captured everything: the confrontation, the scattered documents, and the horrified silence. Martha was the first to regain movement, her face contorting with confusion, rage, and desperate calculation. This is obviously a misunderstanding. Family matters can be so complicated, she hissed, addressing the room, trying to salvage the situation. Federal fraud investigations aren't family matters, Martha, I corrected, bending down to deliberately pick up one of the pages. This is a copy of the formal complaint filed with the SEC. Monday morning, investigators will begin reviewing how Victoria Sterling used Sterling Global Resources to enrich the Hawthorne family business through illegal contracts and kickbacks. Victoria stood perfectly still, her red dress now a flag of defeat. Her phone buzzed 3 times, her lawyer, no doubt, already alerting her to the freeze orders that would hit her accounts within hours. Her eyes met mine across the room, and in that moment she didn't see a woman she had betrayed. She saw the compliance director who had meticulously executed her own professional duty. Guests began to leave, murmuring excuses about early mornings and forgotten commitments. No one wanted to be associated with scandal of this magnitude. The Hawthorne family's carefully constructed world wasn't just collapsing. It was being publicly and forensically disassembled. I had given them what they wanted, a final, mature, and undeniably powerful response. The aftermath of the party was a symphony of destruction, precisely tuned to the hour. By Monday morning, the dominoes began falling with breathtaking speed, confirming the power of thorough documentation over any amount of wealth or influence. I sat in my home office, watching the chaos unfold through news alerts, professional emails, and phone calls I deliberately ignored. 7 a.m. Sterling Global's board of directors convened an emergency meeting. The certified mail I had sent had done its job, detailing Victoria Sterling's breach of fiduciary duty and the potential for regulatory disaster. The sheer volume and precision of the evidence left them no room for internal cover-up. 9 a.m. The first news alert hit the major financial wire services. Sterling Global CEO suspended amidst allegations of financial misconduct. 10 a.m. Federal agents from the FBI and SEC arrived at Sterling Tower with boxes and hard drives, beginning the forensic accounting that would unravel years of carefully hidden fraud, not just involving Michael and Victoria, but potentially encompassing others in the executive team. 12 p.m. Ethan sent me a single, confirming text. She's gone. Feds are here. Board wants to see you tomorrow, 9 a.m. The Hawthorne family business, Hawthorne Global Investments, began to hemorrhage clients like a severed artery. 3 major contracts were terminated within 24 hours as institutional partners scrambled to distance themselves from the scandal. Robert's phone rang constantly, an endless peal of bad news. My appointment with the board was brief and professionally chilling. They offered me a staggering settlement, a generous severance package, and a formal non-disclosure agreement. They knew I had grounds for a massive wrongful termination lawsuit, given Victoria's orchestrated plan to remove me. I accepted the money, signed the NDA, which specifically excluded the ongoing criminal proceedings, and walked away from corporate life with enough capital to start over entirely on my own terms. My integrity, which they had tried to steal, was now financially backed. Tuesday evening, Michael came home to pack. I heard his key in the lock and stayed in the kitchen, giving him space, but he found me anyway, standing in the doorway of our bedroom. His eyes were red-rimmed, his face gaunt with 3 days of stubble. "Eleanor, please!" His voice was hoarse, broken. "Can we talk?" "There's nothing to discuss," I replied, my voice flat. "Your lawyer can contact mine." He stepped into the room, and the air immediately felt too thick. He dropped to his knees beside our bed, the bed where we had spent 12 years, where we talked about children we'd never have. "I never meant for it to go this far," he sobbed, his body shaking. "It started as business. Dad's company was failing. Victoria offered to help. My family pushed me toward her. They said it was for everyone's benefit, that you were too focused on your career to notice or care." His words might have moved the Eleanor of 6 months ago. Now they sounded like desperate attempts to minimize accountability, to shift himself from perpetrator to victim. "Your family didn't forge your signature on those documents, Michael," I said quietly, the cold, hard fact overriding any lingering emotion. "They didn't force you to meet Victoria at the St. Regis while I was traveling. You made those choices. You signed off on the fraud." He whispered, "I still love you." I took a step back. "No, you don't. You love the life I provided. The stability, the respectability, the corporate cover for your family's schemes. Love doesn't conspire. Love doesn't deceive. Love doesn't treat someone's dignity as acceptable collateral damage." He left an hour later, a small suitcase in hand. The divorce papers, handled by Bethany's recommendation, were delivered the next day. Michael forfeited all claims to the brownstone and our joint investments. In exchange, I wouldn't pursue additional criminal charges for the fraudulent tax returns we'd filed jointly while he was hiding illegal income. His attorney, looking exhausted, advised him to sign. The man who once confidently signed million-dollar investment deals was reduced to a trembling mess, watching 12 years dissolve in black ink. Wednesday brought a brief, devastating scene with Chloe Hawthorne. She appeared at my door unannounced, her composure utterly shattered. "I need to tell you everything," she confessed, collapsing onto my living room sofa. "Not for forgiveness, I don't deserve that, but you should know the whole truth." She detailed the conspiracy again, but this time with raw, unedited despair. She revealed how Robert and Martha had systematically targeted Michael's vulnerabilities, convincing him that the affair was a necessary strategic alliance to save the family name. "We all knew from the beginning," Chloe repeated, her voice thick with tears. "Every Sunday dinner, we discussed your schedule. We strategized about how to keep you from finding out. Mom would say you were too smart to be fooled forever, but by then the money would be secured and you'd have to accept it." "You thought I was naive," I said, a statement of fact, not accusation. "We thought you were too focused on being perfect," she corrected, the word hanging heavily in the air. "The perfect wife, the perfect employee. We didn't count on you being systematic, thorough. We didn't know you were documenting everything." She left as the sun set. Her confession, recorded, completed the file. The evidence was now total. financial fraud, premeditation, and systematic deception involving every member of the Hawthorne family. By Friday, Martha's calls had shifted from angry demands to desperate pleas for mercy. Her voicemails cycled through the entire spectrum of manipulation: guilt, rage, bargaining, appeals to family loyalty. "You're destroying us," she wept in one message. "Robert is having chest pains. The business is ruined. How can you do this to family?" Family. The word had lost all meaning. Family was supposed to protect you, not orchestrate your betrayal. Family was supposed to love you, not trade your dignity for financial gain. I deleted every message without listening to the end. The Hawthorns had made their choices months ago when they decided my marriage and my integrity were acceptable sacrifices for their financial survival. I sat in my empty brownstone that Friday night. Michael's scent was gone. Martha's voicemails were finally deleted. The silence felt like the first clean breath after swimming up from deep water. The house felt different now, not lonely but spacious, not abandoned but liberated. I poured myself a glass of wine, not the expensive bottles Michael had collected to impress his colleagues, but a simple Malbec I actually enjoyed, and started planning what came next. The old Eleanor, defined by her title at Sterling Global and her marriage to Michael, was dead. The new Eleanor, the one who had navigated a federal investigation and won her freedom, was ready to build something real. The focus of the battle had shifted from retribution to reconstruction. 6 months passed in a blur of legal finalization, depositions, and the quiet satisfaction of watching justice unfold. The investigation into Sterling Global expanded, encompassing much of the executive team. Victoria Sterling, facing overwhelming evidence, plea bargained down to 2 years minimum security and 5 years probation in exchange for testifying against others. The Hawthorne family business, Hawthorne Global, dissolved entirely, its remaining assets liquidated to pay massive fines and settlements. Michael avoided prison, barely, but received 3 years probation and was permanently barred from working in financial services. His mugshot appeared in the business section of the New York Times, his face gaunt and hollow, nothing like the confident man who'd stood beside me at our wedding. Robert suffered a mild heart attack during the proceedings, requiring constant care that quickly depleted whatever savings they had hidden from investigators. Martha, who had spent decades cultivating her position in Long Island society, found herself uninvited from charity boards and social clubs, a social exile more painful to her than any financial loss. Chloe, overwhelmed by the public shame, moved to Seattle, changing her last name and attempting to start over where nobody knew the family secret. I watched their dissolution with a detached calm. They chose this path. Every time they facilitated a secret meeting, every time they discussed my schedule, every time they looked me in the eye while knowing what they were stealing from me, they signed their own death warrant. The brownstone sold quickly. The proceeds, combined with the settlement from Sterling Global, made me financially independent. I was free, but now faced the monumental question that confronts any person reinventing themselves in midlife. What is my purpose now? The answer came not in the sterile towers of Manhattan, but in the diverse, grounded streets of Queens. I found office space in a converted corner unit in Astoria, a building that housed a bakery, a tax preparation service, and a family law practice. The morning light streamed through windows that actually opened, and the scent of fresh bread filled the air. The first day, the building's super, Mr. Rodriguez, a kind man who spoke little English, brought me homemade empanadas. The neighborhood felt real, and nobody knew or cared about the Hawthorne scandal or my former life in the high-stakes financial district. Vance Compliance Consulting officially opened its doors on a Tuesday in September. Bethany Shaw, the forensic accountant who had helped me, sent me my first client, a small import business whose owner worried about internal fraud. Within a week, I identified 3 major areas of vulnerability and implemented controls that would protect them from the kind of exploitation the Hawthorns had perpetrated. That client referred me to her sister, who ran a medical practice. That sister referred me to a colleague with a growing tech startup. By month's end, I had 6 clients who valued my expertise not because of my corporate pedigree, but because I helped them protect their businesses from predators. My work finally had purpose. These weren't billionaires shuffling assets. These were people who had built something real with their own hands. A florist who'd been overcharged by her processor for years, a restaurant owner whose manager was skimming from the till, a nonprofit director whose board treasurer was funneling contracts to his wife's company. Each case reminded me that financial crimes weren't just about numbers. They were about betrayed trust, about the human cost of corruption. I was no longer an enforcer for the elite. I was a protector of the vulnerable. My 40th birthday arrived in March, exactly 1 year after the party that had destroyed the Hawthorne dynasty and catalyzed my own rebirth. Marie insisted on hosting a dinner at her apartment, nothing fancy, just friends who had known me before the marriage, before Sterling Global, before any of it mattered. We sat around her kitchen table, eating Chinese takeout from containers, drinking wine that cost $12 a bottle, and laughing until midnight. Nobody mentioned Michael or the scandal. We talked about normal things, Marie's promotion at the hospital, our friend Beth's new baby, the book club selection nobody had actually finished reading. "You seem good, Eleanor," Marie said as she walked me to the door. "Really good. Not just surviving, but actually happy." She was right. For the first time in years, maybe for the first time ever, I felt aligned with my own life. No performance, no managing appearances, no strategic relationships that required constant maintenance and calculation. A week later, I stood on the steps of my new brownstone in Astoria, coffee in hand, watching Queens wake up to a perfect spring morning. The cherry trees were blooming along the street, and families were beginning their Sunday routines. My phone buzzed with a text from a new client, a small, ethical investment firm that wanted help establishing compliance protocols that would protect them from both internal fraud and predatory partners. It was exactly the kind of work that mattered. The truth I had learned wasn't about revenge or justice or even survival. It was simpler than that. When someone shows you through their actions that your dignity is an acceptable casualty for their gain, believe them. Document everything. And then, without fanfare, build something better from whatever remains. The Hawthorns thought they were conducting a sophisticated financial operation. They never understood that what they were really doing was teaching me my own worth, not in dollars or social standing, but in the simple ability to recognize deception, document the truth, and refuse to be complicit in my own destruction. Standing there in the spring morning, I realized I had won something infinitely more valuable than any settlement or verdict. I had won the right to live without pretense, to work without compromise, and to trust without fear. The Hawthorns lost everything trying to take what wasn't theirs. I gained everything by simply refusing to let them take my self-respect. My new life wasn't about a high-rise office or a social title. It was about the profound human satisfaction of knowing my integrity was now an asset used to protect others. That was the real, lasting victory. The final chapter wasn't about an ending. It was about the magnificent, purposeful beginning of Eleanor Vance's next 40 years.